One of the best cards of the year, UFC 320, is a little over a week away, which means it's officially time for my full card predictions. So I'm going to break down every single matchup, main card, and the prelims, give my winner pick, how I think they get it done. Like I said, this is a really strong card, 2 title fights, a stacked main card. Even on the prelims, there are some really interesting, fun matchups. So let's just dive right into it. There are going to be timestamps in the description if you guys want to jump around to specific matchups. But we are going to start off this card with Veronica taking on Brogan Walker. And I'm a fan of Veronica. She's been on a pretty impressive run since taking a 3-year layoff. I believe she returned in 2023. Since then, she has had 4 fights. She has gone 3-1. And overall, she's just a really skilled fighter. Really like her body and head kicks. She has really good footwork on the feet. She's always moving, stays pretty defensively responsible. I think the biggest issue for her, at least at this point and in her current weight class, is that she is just really undersized. She's listed at 5'4" with a 64-inch reach. I'd honestly be surprised if she's actually 5'4". I think she's probably shorter than that. And you just look at some of her opponents, and she's just clearly undersized in the women's flyweight weight class. So that's been the big issue. But from a skill perspective, I do think she's up there as one of the most skilled flyweights. Then looking at her opponent, Brogan Walker, she is 0-2 in the UFC, and she's coming off a pretty long layoff. Her last fight, obviously a loss, was in April of 2023. I just think there's a major skill gap here between these two women. Brogan Walker, she doesn't really specialize in one specific area. On the feet, she's kind of got like this awkward, stiff style. She's also been taken down 4 times in both of her UFC fights. I'm going to predict a pretty clean win here for Veronica. I think she picks up the decision dub. Then looking at a matchup between Ramiz Brahimaj taking on Austin Vanderford. This is a grappler versus grappler matchup. For Ramiz here, he's been very good as the hammer. He's really struggled being the nail so far in his UFC career. He's finished all 12 of his pro wins, 11 by submission, 1 by knockout in the UFC. He's got a solid 4-3 record. All 4 of his wins have come in the first round. The issue is that when he loses, he kind of loses in dominant fashion. So in his 3 UFC losses, 1 of them he was knocked out, and then the other 2 he was 30-27. We saw in the 2 decision losses, he was control grappled by Temba Garimbo and Court McGee. For Austin Vanderford here, he's coming off a very dominant UFC debut, had a decent amount of fights in Bellator, came over to the UFC, picked up a round 2 ground and pound finish. I believe it was against Nikolay Veretennikov, who actually we're going to talk about in the next matchup. But Vanderford's just a very solid grappler, good control on the ground, can land some solid ground and pound like we saw in his debut. And so in this matchup, I think we're going to see Vanderford have some success getting Brahimaj down, racking up that control time. The main thing he's going to have to look out for in this matchup is just a submission from Brahimaj. He does have a very dangerous guillotine. I think Vanderford's going to be able to stay safe on the ground. I think this is going to be a pretty clear 30-27 win. I think he gets it done by decision. Then, like I mentioned, we have Vanderford's former opponent, Nikolay Veretennikov, taking on Soriano. Puna's 2-0 since moving down to 170. Did appear to be undersized up at middleweight, has looked good at welterweight. He's a southpaw striker. He has great combinations where he switches stances to kind of close the distance. Will throw these big, powerful hooks. He's very powerful, also very durable so far in his MMA career. We have seen him struggle a little bit in the grappling department, only has a 37% takedown defense. But also in not his most recent fight, but his first fight down at 170, he actually went to the grappling, had a lot of success. That's how he took down Miguel Baeza, landed 5 takedowns, racked up 11 minutes of control time. So he does have that in his bag and is willing to go to it. It's not like he is, solely a striker at this point. On the other side with Veretennikov, he picked up his first UFC win against Francisco Prado. This was a super close split decision fight. He's got a pretty big frame for welterweight, primarily a striker, really loves the spinning attacks like we saw in his most recent fight. Veretennikov just has negative fight IQ. I also don't really trust his cardio. I kind of just trust Puna more everywhere. Not saying that Puna couldn't get taken down by Veretennikov, but I just think he's the more intelligent fighter. I think on the feet, he has the danger factor. And I think if one of these guys is going to mix it up and have success, I do think that would be Puna. So I'm going to go with Puna round 1 knockout. Then we have a really interesting bantamweight matchup between Patchy Mix and Jakub Wiklacz. I'm probably butchering that name. I apologize. For Patchy Mix, I was really excited for his UFC debut going up against Mario Bautista, and it was a pretty awful performance. He looked extremely flat-footed on the feet. He had no head movement. And then I think the biggest concern is those were all kind of issues with his striking style, but he just showed no urgency to actually use his grappling. That's one of the most frustrating things when you're watching a fighter, specifically if you pick them. I predicted Patchy Mix to win that fight, and it's when they just fight so suboptimally and they don't go to what they do best. That is what we saw out of Patchy Mix going up against Mario Bautista. And if you just watch that fight and watch his footwork on the feet, and you just look like waist down when you're looking at his legs, his movement, it literally looked like a senior citizen. Like, it looked like he was completely immobile. It was one of the weirdest things I've seen, especially down in bantamweight, where you typically have like the best athletes, they're going to be the most technical, have the best movement. It was just an awful watch for Patchy Mix. But like I mentioned, he is a very, very dangerous grappler. He has submission wins in Bellator against Sergio Pettis and Magomed Magomedov. 13 of his 20 pro wins are by submission. Mix's opponent, Jakub, I'm just going to call him Jakub. I'm not trying to butcher the last name over and over again. He is the former KSW bantamweight champion, left on top as the champ, went 6-1-1 in that promotion. He is also primarily a grappler. 10 of his 16 wins are by submission. He's kind of got an interesting style because on the feet, he is, kind of aggressive. He's a lot looser than Patchy Mix. Like, Patchy Mix is very stiff, I think, in like a negative way. And I would say that Jakub is kind of loose also in a negative way, where he can kind of overextend, a little bit reckless, can set himself up for some counter shots, which is kind of odd that he fights that way because he has 0 career KO wins, but he fights like a guy who really is a threat on the feet. Both of these guys have pretty long frames for the bantamweight division. Both of these guys have proven 5-round cardio. I do just lean towards Patchy Mix in this matchup. I just think we've seen him have success, especially in the grappling department, against more legit, proven competition. It kind of is a mirror matchup just based on the frame, both of these guys wanting to get the fight to the ground. I do just think Patchy Mix is the better, more proven grappler, and so I'm going to pick Patchy Mix by decision. Then we have a women's bantamweight matchup between Macy Chiasson and Yana Santos. For Chiasson, she's coming off a unanimous decision loss to Ketlen Vieira. She's kind of got some unique finishing upside at women's 135. I feel like a weight class where you don't see a ton of finishes. She had a TKO win from a cut against Mayra Bueno Silva. She had 2 submission wins against Pani Kianzad. She's had knockouts against Sarah Moros and Gina Mazzani. And then for 135, she's pretty physically imposing. She's big for the weight class, 5'11" with a 72-inch reach. And in this matchup, I do give her the grappling edge over Yana Santos. For Yana Santos, she's coming off of back-to-back wins against Miesha Tate and Chelsea Chandler. Not great competition, like Chelsea Chandler, very limited success in the UFC. Miesha Tate, obviously a former champ, but at this stage in his career, not really a player in the weight class. Santos is primarily a striker, has shown some questionable takedown defense throughout her UFC career. It's down at 53%. And I do think Macy Chiasson is a step up in competition from, her last 2 opponents where she has picked up wins. In these matchups at women's 135, you're not typically seeing these huge swings, these huge moments. And typically, a lot of these rounds can just be decided by who lands the takedown and racks up a few minutes of control time, because whatever's going on the feet doesn't really override what happened in the control, even if it, potentially should. But I just feel like Macy Chiasson has the upside for the bigger moments. She does have that finishing upside. And then I also think she has the advantage in the grappling, where she could potentially land a takedown or 2 and rack up some control time. So I am going to pick Macy Chiasson by decision. Then we have a really fun matchup here between Daniel Santos and Ju Sang Yu. Santos picked up a win in May, coming back after almost a 2-year layoff. He's 12-2 as a pro, 3-1 in the UFC. He fights with a very frenetic pace. He's durable, never been knocked out in his MMA career. He's got great kicks, works the body, also has a solid ground game, not afraid to mix things up in the octagon. On the other side with Ju Sang Yu, you guys might remember him, had a really impressive debut, 28-second knockout against Jeka Sargi. I think it was a check left hook, just completely face planted the dude, an awesome way to debut in the UFC. He's a very slick striker, has a laser right hand, very fluid on the feet, also likes the spinning attacks. Defensively, I do think it's kind of questionable He keeps his hands very low. His chin's kind of up there. It is exposed. We have seen him even pre-UFC get countered on the feet, but so far has been pretty durable. He's also just fairly untested against like solid UFC competition. I know he knocked out Jekka Sargi. Unfortunately, I just don't think Sargi is UFC caliber. We've seen Daniel Willie Cat Santos like pick up some pretty solid wins so far in the UFC. In this matchup, I do think you will be the cleaner, sharper striker, but I just like Santos's overall well-rounded game. I think he's going to push the pace. I think he's going to force the grappling exchanges. We know he's tough to finish. I'm going to pick Santos by decision. I think he builds throughout the fight. Maybe he drops round 1. I think he picks up round 2 and round 3 and ends up getting a submission win. Then we have a grappler versus striker matchup here between Farid Basharat and Chris Gutierrez. Basharat, definitely the more successful of the two Basharat brothers, 13-0, undefeated, 4-0 in the UFC. He averages almost 4 takedowns per 15 minutes and hits those takedowns at a rate of 44%. He's also just picked up like 3 very solid wins in the UFC against Victor Hugo, Taylor Lapilus, and Damone Blackshear. On the other side with Chris Gutierrez, he has a very strong UFC record, 10-3-1, and his only losses have been against like really solid competition, Song Yadong, Pedro Munoz. Obviously this was, when Munoz was more in his prime, and Ione Barcelos. He has a style where he wants to stay on the outside, use his striking, use his movement, his footwork to kind of just pick at you, land jabs, land his really nice low kicks. He's not going to risk it. He's not trying to win fights on these huge moments, not really pushing for the finish, especially in a lot of his recent fights. He's definitely very risk averse in his style. The issue with that, though, is that his takedown defense has been a little bit questionable in his last few fights. And so if you are getting taken down, but you're not having those big moments on the feet, you can potentially lose rounds that way. We've seen him give up 4 minutes of control time at least in each of his last 3 fights. I just think Basharat has been consistent with his success on the ground. I don't think Gutierrez has significantly better takedown defense or like the ability to get up compared to some of these other fighters that Basharat has had some success against. So I'm going to go with Farid Basharat by decision. I think he keeps it rolling. I think he stays undefeated. And up at middleweight, we have Edmen Shahbazyan taking on Andre Muniz. This is like the prototypical striker versus grappler matchup, just like we talked about. It seems like Edmen Shahbazyan gets hit with a lot of these where it kind of has been his kryptonite going up against grapplers, but he did just pass a test against Andre Petrosky, so maybe he's making some improvement there. Shahbazyan on the feet is a very dangerous striker. 12 of his 15 wins have come by knockout. 6 of his 8 UFC wins are by knockout. But like I mentioned, he has struggled with grapplers. His losses have come to Derek Brunson, Jack Hermanson, Nasruddin Imavov, who did use the grappling in that fight, Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, and then Gerald Mearshart. And then in his losses, he has been finished in 4 out of 5 of them. And it typically is him getting taken down, held there, and then he just starts to gas, and then they end up finishing him that way. But like I mentioned, last fight, a decision win against Andre Petrosky, someone who went in with the game plan to take him down, someone who, has had most of his success in the UFC on the mat, and Petrosky could only manage to get 23 seconds of control time. So that definitely was a very solid win for Edmen Shahbazyan. He's going up against Andre Muniz, who is a very dangerous submission threat. 15 of his 24 pro wins are by submission. He has a 6-3 UFC record. 3 of those wins were by submission, all arm bars. He looks great when he can, have the fight go his way, when he can land a takedown, rack up that control time, but he really starts to wilt if he's not able to fight in his realm, if he can't land the takedown, if he's forced to stay on the feet, or even if someone's able to get him down, then he starts to fade. And then also just offensively, even if he can get the fight to the ground, he's very limited in terms of actually landing damage. I want to say his most recent win was against the Iron Turtle, Jun Sung Park, and I think he racked up like 11 minutes of control time, and it was a split decision. Like, you could have argued that Iron Turtle won that fight because Muniz just did nothing in terms of actually landing damage. And so I am going to lean towards Edmen Shahbazyan here. I just trust him on the feet, especially early in this fight, to make things uncomfortable. I think Muniz is going to wilt in front of him. I'm going to go with Edmen Shahbazyan, round 1 knockout. He's definitely a quick starter. We've seen him get those round 1 finishes. I think that is what he does in this matchup. Then a fight I'm really excited for, really just to watch one dude. It is a Teba Gautier taking on Ozzy Diaz. I've been high on Gautier for a while now. I think I did a video might have been like 6 months ago, talking about like the top prospect in every weight class. And I kind of took a little bit of a leap of faith and picked Teba Gautier. He's super raw. We really hadn't seen him. I think he only had, one fight in the UFC at that point, but he's 8-1. He's 2-0 now in the UFC. Both wins were round one knockouts. He is very young at 23 years old. The dude is a physical freak. Like, all the physical tools are there. 6'4" with an 81-inch reach. He is an elite athlete. He is extremely explosive. He is very, very powerful. And I know some people are kind of underwhelmed with this matchmaking. Ozzy Diaz, it does seem like a matchup where Gautier is going to have a lot of success. But I kind of like this. The dude's 23 years old. Like, what are we hoping? He goes out, has a super tough fight, and loses? Like, let him get his feet wet a little bit. Let him build up the experience. This is someone who I do think could be a champion in the future. I'm kind of glad the UFC isn't just completely throwing him to the wolves. But I think what's most interesting about Gautier is that he has, right, that elite athleticism. He has that power, but it's the patience he fights with. A lot of dudes, when they hit that hard, they're just going to go out, they're going to throw bombs. It's going to look like Francis Ngannou against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. That is not how Teba Gautier fights. Even when he lands a big shot, he's still very reserved. He stays within himself. He stays calculated. He throws well in combination. And it's not like he doesn't have good finishing instincts. He'll still go for the finish, but he doesn't do it in a reckless way. As you guys can probably tell, I'm very high on Gautier. Very excited to see him here in his third UFC fight. On the other side with Ozzy Diaz, he's 1-1 in the UFC. Last fight was a decision win, pretty questionable. I think it probably should have gone the other way. The thing that really stands out in this fight is just like the extreme athleticism gap. Like, Teba Gautier is like 100th percentile in terms of athleticism in the UFC. Ozzy Diaz is, not all the way on the other side of the spectrum, but like nothing stands out from him in terms of being like a top athlete. I guess you could say he has like good cardio, but I just don't think he has the power, the finishing upside against legit UFC competition. So I'm going to pick Teba Gautier here. I think he picks up another round one knockout. I'd love to see it, like the UFC, to continue to build him, because I do think his ceiling is very, very high. Then I believe we have arrived at the main card. We have a middleweight fight between Joe Pyfer and Abus Magomedov. And I think at this point, Joe Pyfer's kind of become a little bit underrated. I know a lot of people dislike him. I think they don't really like his personality, and that's fine. But I think it's kind of carried over into people kind of being down on his style, his overall ability. I think he has a lot of the tools to be a real player here at middleweight. He's only 29 years old. Like, there's still room to grow. I think he definitely is someone who could compete for a title at one point. So he's a big, athletic middleweight. He's explosive. He's powerful. He's competent on the ground. Like, he does have a solid ground game. I think it gets slept on a little bit just because he doesn't go to it a ton. I do think he can be a little bit like big shot reliant, where he's just looking for that knockout punch. Maybe he could throw a little bit out there, be a little bit more consistent. But like I said, he's only 29 years old, has a lot of room to grow. I think Joe Pyfer is very, very good. On the other side with Abus Magomedov, he's kind of had an interesting UFC run here. He came in with a super quick knockout. The UFC, inexplicably puts him in a main event against Sean Strickland. He looks terrible in that fight, completely gasses out in round 2 of a 5-round fight. Then he loses pretty, decisively to Kyle Bohalio. But since then, he's gone on a 3-fight win streak, decisions against Michel Pereira and Warley Alves. And then I believe he picked up a submission win against the Hulk, Bruno Ferreira. He's a solid grappler. He's gone to that a lot in his recent matchups, 11 takedowns in his last 3 fights. He was, someone who was considered a knockout threat coming into the UFC. Haven't really seen that been super successful so far against UFC level competition. I do just think Joe Pyfer is better. I know Pyfer did lose his, sole UFC fight by getting out grappled by Jack Hermanson, but that was in the later rounds. He still banked the first 2. This is a 3-round fight. I think on the feet, Joe Pyfer is just way more dangerous. And I don't think he's going to get taken down at will by Abus Magomedov. So I'm going to go with Joe Pyfer picking up a round 2 knockout win. Then at featherweight, we have Josh Emmett going up against Youssef Zalal. And it feels like there are 2 very likely outcomes of this fight, one in either direction of who wins. If Josh Emmett wins, you feel like you're going to get a brutal knockout. If Youssef Zalal wins, it seems like you're probably going to get a boring, underwhelming decision win like we saw in his most recent fight. For Josh Emmett, he is getting up there in age, 40 years old. He's 1-3 in his last 4, but losing to legit competition, Lerone Murphy, Ilia Topuria, Yair Rodriguez, We know he has that nuclear power. He has 12 knockdowns in his UFC career. Very boxing heavy, not going to do a ton with the legs. He's durable, also is a capable wrestler. We saw him go to that a decent amount against Lerone Murphy. Wasn't great at racking up control time, but I do think he landed like 4 takedowns in that matchup. On the other side with Youssef Zalal, he is 4-0 since starting his second stint in the UFC. I think the way we saw Zalal fight against Calvin Kattar is very similar to how we saw Lerone Murphy beat Josh Emmett in their most recent fights. I think Zalal is going to come in here. He's going to use his footwork, his lateral movement. He's going to circle the cage. He's just going to pick at Josh Emmett. You don't want to just stand and trade in the pocket with Josh Emmett. Like, I know Lerone Murphy got a lot of hate for his performance against Josh Emmett, but not everyone's Ilia Topuria where you're going to stand in there and get into these like boxing sequences with Josh Emmett. For a lot of dudes, it's just not smart. So we clearly see that Zalal can execute that game plan like he did against Calvin Kattar. We saw that Josh Emmett's kind of susceptible to that in the Lerone Murphy fight. I do think Zalal is going to have success just in that type of matchup. He also is, fairly dangerous on the ground, pretty solid submission game if it does get there, but I think he's going to want to keep this one standing. I think he picks up a decision win. I think the UFC is kind of setting this matchup up where it's like fans are once again going to be disappointed. Like, people were not happy with him after the Calvin Kattar fight. This is pretty much, I think, like going to be a mirror outcome where fans are not going to be pleased, but I think he's going to keep the win streak going, and I do think he gets the dub. Then we have arrived at the big 3 final matchups. You have the 2 title matchups, and then this potential number 1 contender fight between Jiri Prochazka and Khalil Rountree. I'm expecting a pure striking battle. I don't really think either of these dudes are going to be looking to grapple, shoot takedowns. I just don't see it happening. For Jiri, he is coming off his round 3 knockout against Jamal Hill. He obviously has this very chaotic style that works specifically for him because of his power and then also just like his crazy durability against pretty much everyone except for Alex Pereira. I do think he showed some defensive improvements against Jamal Hill, was clearly trying to keep the hands up a little bit more, was still kind of funky, but you did see like a more mature style out of Jiri Prochazka. For Khalil Rountree, he is the much cleaner striker. He is explosive. He can close distance quickly. He throws well in combination. Nice straight left into like that lead right hook. He can throw some nice body kicks. He can also beat up the legs. Also way more defensively responsible than Jiri Prochazka. And I feel like when you're hearing those 2 breakdowns, you're thinking like, all right, Khalil Rountree has the tools. He should be able to get this one done. Jiri's very hittable. He's also struggled against guys who do attack him with the leg kicks. But Khalil Rountree just doesn't have close to the same danger factor as Jiri Prochazka. And I think this is going to be a fight similar to the Rakic one, where I think Rountree is going to look like the better guy. He's going to look like the way more technical striker like he is. He's going to be having a lot of success. And then all of a sudden, Jiri is going to land that big shot because it seems like it almost always happens. And I think Jiri is going to get this one done. I'm going to go Jiri Prochazka round 2 KO. I just don't know if Rountree has like that potent finishing upside to really get Jiri out of there. And it is tough to just like be able to not get finished by Jiri for a full 3 rounds. I don't think it happens. I think Jiri Prochazka ends up finding the knockout win. And then moving into the co-main, we have Merab Dvalishvili taking on Cory Sandhagen. And Merab has just looked straight up unstoppable in his title reign. I think he probably is the best cardio in UFC history. We saw some evolution in his submission game against Sean O'Malley. Typically he had been very control heavy. He ends up submitting Sean O'Malley in his most recent title fight. And then it's just been the consistency that he's been able to land the takedowns. He really hasn't had any slip-ups where guys just like are able to stop his grappling. In his last 5 fights against legit, top-tier competition, he landed at least 5 takedowns against O'Malley in both matchups. Umar, Piotr Yan, Henry Cejudo, these are great grapplers, some of these guys, and Merab is still pretty much able to do whatever he wants. And then on the feet, I'm not going to say he's like an amazing striker, but I think his striking style does work really well with the threat of grappling because he is just tough to hit clean. He's always moving. When he does take shots, he's fairly safe. He just doesn't get caught in these weird positions, and it is just tough to square him up. So Merab, the dude's a monster, has a very strong case to be the bantamweight GOAT. Then for Cory Sandhagen, I will just say at the top, I'm a huge Cory Sandhagen fan. He might be my favorite fighter in the UFC right now. And I do think he is going to perform better than people are expecting. I feel like a lot of people are just like completely writing him off. They think Merab is just going to run through him. I think he has, some of the tools that could make this an interesting matchup. He does have a solid ground game. I think he's even talked about how like the way you beat Merab is not just like completely avoiding the grappling. He's talked about how he's not going to straight up shy away from these grappling exchanges. Like, not that he's going to initiate and start shooting takedowns, but he's not going to be fearful of getting taken down because it's pretty much bound to happen. We also saw in like the Umar Nurmagomedov fights, the Figgy matchups, like he has some impressive scrambles. He can get back to his feet. He's not just, a fish out of water when he does get put on his back. And then I also think in his most recent fight against Figgy, and then also just hearing him talk about his own style, it does seem like he's kind of fine-tuning his footwork. He wants to be a little bit more intentional, more efficient with his movement, not just like constantly circling and burning a lot of energy. And I do think that could be helpful in this matchup against Merab because we kind of saw that with O'Malley where he's just constantly moving and eventually you're going to get tired if you're not being super efficient. And then also, like I talked about some of the tools, he has shown, the dangerous knees. Frankie Edgar trying to shoot in on him. He puts him out cold. I think the issue for Sandhagen, and I probably wouldn't pick him, regardless, just because Merab has been so dominant, but we haven't really seen that same danger factor that he had early on in his UFC career where he's, throwing the spinning wheel kicks against Marlon Moraes and he's throwing the flying knee against Frankie Edgar. It seems like he's kind of shied away from those more like explosive, big time strikes. And it just seems like he's trying to be so perfect in there. And like, he's good at it. He can win fights like that. But when you're going up against guys who can take you down and they can rack up control time, you're going to need some of those big moments on the feet. Like you need those big wins to swing rounds. And I just don't know if he's going to find them in this matchup. I mean, I'd love if Cory Sandhagen went out there and picked up the win. It'd be super impressive. I like Merab, but like I said, Cory's probably my favorite at this point, but I have to go with Merab. He's just been so dominant. He's so impressive. I think he continues his title reign here. I'm going to pick him by decision. I don't think Cory gets finished, but I think Merab by decision is probably the right pick. And then we have arrived at the main event, the rematch between Magomed Ankalaev and Alex Pereira. I think this is a really interesting rematch. I think the first fight was very, very competitive. I feel like some people have kind of forgotten, like this truly was a fight where if you scored it for Pereira, that wasn't a crazy scorecard. Like this fight could have gone either way. I think there are some kind of parallels between the Islam Makhachev, Alexander Volkanovski first fight in terms of like both guys kind of had their specific route to victory, at least people thought heading into the fight, where people expected Magomed to go in, be super grappling heavy, take Pereira down, hold him there, potentially finish him on the ground, or just bank rounds that way. And then it was like Alex Pereira is going to have success on the feet. That's where he can win this fight. Obviously, the Islam-Volk fight, it was like Islam has the major advantage on the ground. Volk has the advantage on the feet. But you saw both guys kind of outperform in the other ones, like expected dominant area, where Volk kind of held up in the grappling a lot better than people expected. Islam held his own on the feet. Magomed in this matchup looked great on the feet. I mean, he was the guy that actually landed like the most dangerous shots against Alex Pereira, hurt him. I think it was towards the end of that second round. But then in the grappling, Pereira held up great, didn't get taken down, stuffed all 12 takedowns. And so I do think that makes this rematch very interesting, where it's like who can make up ground in each specific area. I do want to start off just with the striking here because Magomed Ankalaev is a tough matchup, even just on the feet for Pereira, where he's hard to hit clean. He's very patient. He doesn't overextend. He's fine being in like these low volume, kickboxing fights, which like you think would favor Pereira, but when he's also mixing in the grappling, trying to shoot takedowns, trying to rack up control time, it can make it a little bit uncomfortable, and it does limit the amount of just like big strikes, finishing strikes that Pereira can land. He's going to need to have more success to the head, Pereira, if he wants to win this fight. In a 5-round, 25-minute fight, Pereira only landed 11 significant strikes to the head. That's compared to Magomed Ankalaev's 36. We did see Pereira have a lot of success with the leg kicks. That's been an issue for Magomed. We saw Jan Blachowicz take advantage of that. But you can't just win these rounds and, eventually fights with only leg kicks. Like he's going to need to add more to the body, to the head, I think, if he wants to give himself a better shot. And then when we look at his takedown defense, like I said, it was great. Stuffed all 12 takedowns. He was really only controlled heavily in round 4, and then I think like a minute and a half in round 5, but like did a great job. Coming into the first fight, I did think like if this went 5 rounds, he would get taken down a few times, maybe even controlled for like, consistent amount of time on the ground where Magomed could bank rounds, and it just didn't really happen. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, like, what are the big changes that are going to happen in this rematch? Is Magomed going to take a leap, find more success in the grappling department? Is Pereira going to find more success in the striking? I think you can make an argument that Pereira's grappling is probably improving at a quicker rate than Magomed, just because like he is a lot newer to the sport. If he was already able to stuff all of Magomed's takedowns, I think he's going to have more confidence heading into this second matchup. And he does need more confidence because he needs to fight with more urgency on the feet. He needs to take some bigger risks. And hopefully the fact that like in the back of his mind, he remembers he didn't get taken down, maybe that allows him to open up a little bit more on the feet. And then also in the clinch, like he just can't get held there. Once he stuffs the takedown, he needs to be urgent in getting the fight back at distance because he can win like that 5-round striking battle. If he's just landing the leg kicks, he can kind of win rounds that way, but it's just not good optically if you're not landing a ton up top and then you're getting held against the cage. Like it's just going to be tough to swing rounds that way. So I'm expecting a very close competitive fight once again. I'm actually going to go with the underdog here. I'm going to pick Alex Pereira. I picked him to win the first fight. Obviously didn't go his way. I'm going to go back to the well here. I am conflicted. Like you can see Magomed just executing a similar game plan. Even if he lands like 1 or 2 takedowns, Pereira is not great at getting back to his feet. Like he's kind of content to just like dead fish and ride out the round. And so like if Magomed can clinch a round or 2 that way, like that would be a huge swing in this fight. But I also just have a tough time seeing Pereira like land as little as he did in the first fight with how much time they actually spent at distance on the feet. I think the confidence is going to be there. I think he's going to be more aggressive. I think he's going to come in with the urgency he didn't have in the first fight. And I'm going to pick him by decision. Obviously, Pereira's always live for a finish, a knockout. But I think this one goes all 5. I think it's close, but I think he gets this one done. But let me know your thoughts down below. Do you guys agree with my picks? Who do you have in the main event? The co-main, Jiri versus Rountree? Let me hear it down below. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.